Welcome to Your College-Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that causes you to meet interesting people that you would never meet if you never went to college. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, April 24th, and welcome to episode number 65, Advice on Letters of Recommendation. In this week's news, hackers breach college-applicant databases and seek ransom. And we're in chapter 65 of 171 answers, and Mark is sharing his sound advice for your child's letters of recommendation. And this week's question is from a dad who wants to know how to factor in a university's honors college when categorizing the schools on his child's list. And Mark's interview this week is with Mr. Chris Carleton. He's the founder of StudyAbroadSmarter.com, and they're in part one of The Value of Studying Abroad.
Anika, when I go to a conference, I like to come back and share some nuggets, and I'm going to start to share some with our friends of the podcast. And as you know, I was at the SACAC conference last week, hundreds of counselors meeting with hundreds of admissions counselors. And one workshop I attended in particular said something I realized I hadn't really shared this either with our friends of the show or even my clients. And so I want to share it. So let's say your name is Rodney Adam Johnson and you apply to a college. So what they do is they create a record for you, Rodney Adam Johnson. But let's say your test scores come in and they say Rod Johnson. Okay, now they're going to create a second record for you. And then let's say a teacher recommendation comes back and it's Adam Johnson, your middle name. Now there's 3 records for you. So what do schools do so that you don't show up 3 times? What they're doing is they're using your email as the one thing that's standard. So I was at a workshop and a large university said, please tell your students use the same email from start to finish. So I just wanted to pass that on to all of our listeners so you don't show up as 3-headed monster.
Very, very helpful. Thank you, Mark.
And before we transition, we're doing these shout outs. And a lot of times, everybody, of course, Anika, they see you and I, but they don't see the people behind the show. So I want to give a shout out to our faithful John Luckenbach, who is our engineer, our producer, and he is the owner and chief engineer of a company called Queued Up. Nice creative name. And John has a lot of experience in the recording, sound, and audio industry. And guess what? He's located very close to Westchester, Pennsylvania, where I lived for a long time. But he's a graduate of Indiana University in Pennsylvania, where he learned all about business and production techniques. He's got a wife, 3 daughters. He loves music, gardening, and brewing beer and wine. How's that for creativity? And he's been in the podcasting field for 11 years. And he's just really, really fantastic to work with. So if anyone is looking for a sound engineer or you're thinking about starting a podcast, we would highly recommend John Luckenbach. And his website is www.qd-up.com. And Anika, he kind of bailed us out when we were in a jam.
Best audio engineer ever.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, this week's article is entitled Hackers Breach College-Applicant Databases and Seek Ransom. And this is found in the Wall Street Journal. It's written by Mr. Douglas Belkin and Ms. Melissa Korn. And so hackers recently were able to reset college staff member passwords to get data on prospective students and attempt to sell it back to them for the sticker price of only $3,800. And the schools affected by this were Oberlin College in Ohio, Grinnell College in Iowa, and Hamilton College in New York. And the criminals specifically emailed the students and told them that $3,800 would get them back their entire admissions file, craziness, which would include assigned ratings, comments by admissions officers, interview reports, just to name a few, Mark. Mark, thieves make me very, very angry. And I mean, theft is very frustrating to me just because of my past experiences. And here's my note to the FBI. Listen, guys, you can do it. You can find them. Please dig deep. These people need to be found. And Mark, but what's most interesting though, Mark, in this is that the article says that Grinnell and Hamilton are still on track to sending out acceptances. So how exactly is that working for them?
Well, I mean, they have to do that. If they don't send acceptances out, they're not going to have any kids next year. But they're trying their best.
I mean, but the data is breached. I can't.
It's not so. It's not so much that the data is breached. It's that what happened was the hackers tapped in and found out what was in the file. So they have access to, like, okay, Anika, let's say, Anika, you're an admissions officer, right? You have comments and notes that you record when you read a file, and you have a rating system we use the 3-tier rating system we borrowed from the colleges: an academic rating, a personal rating, and extracurricular rating. So it has the rating with the comments. So that's what they tapped into. And what they started doing is saying, listen, aren't you curious how Oberlin read your file? Wouldn't you like to know what they actually said about you, what score they gave you, and what comments the admission officer said? So that's what they tapped into. And they use Slate, which is a CRM, a customer relations management software program that is used by almost 1,000 colleges now, and it's designed and developed exclusively for higher ed. And it's really kind of the only solution that sort of can handle the breadth and depth of modern admissions and advancement, at least at the level that it does. And colleges use this for outreach, for travel management, for online reading and online application. So they tapped into Slate. Which Slate's the same thing a lot of colleges use, Anika, where they're tracking your online footprint we've talked about and figuring out where you're going. And so that's what they did. So it's not like the decision was going to change, right? But it's just that this is obviously very private and personal information that you do not want applicants to know. Right? That's very private what you put, in your comments. And so that's kind of what happened. Does that clear it up at all, or?
Yeah, it does, but still.
It doesn't diminish the frustration about the theft, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely not. And I have to admit, I do also get annoyed when my employers always want you or anybody saying all the change your password, make it to a lowercase letter, and all that stuff. Don't send certain things. And I do tell my kids that too, like, don't be sending your your personal information through the web, your social security number, all of that stuff. So I get it. And because there are people clearly on guard, on deck, standing there waiting for you to mess something up so you can get into your stuff and ransom you for, which is really crazy.
But, this particular, article, most of the time when we have an article, Anika, there's a very, very clear so what, right? Like, we want people to take action. This is just more of an FYI one for people. There's not necessarily a major action they can take. It's just kind of FYI. There's hackers out there. There's theft out there. People are trying to make $1 off people on this college admission process, one way or another. That's really it. But I wanted to read, Anika, that there are a couple comments that how when you read an article, when you subscribe, you can comment. Like, sometimes I will comment to the Wall Street Journal college admissions articles. And so there were some comments I went in and read, and I thought some of them were interesting, if not funny. So here are some of the comments that the readers to the Wall Street Journal shared after reading this article. One, colleges have notoriously been lax and weak at security practices and IT skills in general. That's why they can't teach modern IT to their students. It's pretty pathetic. Notice that these are liberal. Yeah.
Oh,
but, hey, you know how it is online. You're going to fire off. Notice that these are liberal arts colleges, a particularly soft target. The provider's weak refrain after reviewing single sign-on practices is really entertaining. Another one. You'd think the hackers would instead target the universities and demand a ransom in lieu of releasing the data. Paper is not hackable, someone else said. The very simple solution is ransomware, our nightly backups. With the cost today of data storage, not doing so is idiotic. Entities would be making far better decisions for security if they were being legally liable. And by the way, Grinnell and Hamilton offer computer science degrees. So these are just comments from people. Another one. Why don't they have their students do a case study on their own college vulnerabilities to being hacked as a course study instead of some useless elective? And then the last one, it's a tough sell. Ever go through financial approvals at a medium to large organization? It's no fun. Each line item is challenged, and the ROI on cybersecurity is terrible if the app approvers don't understand the risk. And regardless of how you explain it, with what data and terms a child can understand, some are going to refuse to get it. We haven't been hacked yet. Why is it an issue? Or how much damage can this really cause? Which is interesting. Basically, the person is saying that there's not really good ROI on investing a lot in security. But I guess it's one of those things that, hey, when you need it, you need it. It's like insurance, right? So anyway,
exactly.
It's just a little FYI article. Not a whole lot of so what's for people to apply, but thought people might be curious. Any final thoughts?
What I think there is a so what. I think the so what is keep changing your password.
That's true.
And follow your employer's instructions. I mean, those things are really important.
Well, you know what, and that actually pertains to everything else too, right? Because you're going to have a password for your College Board account. You're going to have a password for your Common App account.
Right.
You're going to have a password for other things, obvious, So, yeah, good. I like that.
There it is.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
So we are all the way up to the 65th week. Can you believe that,
Anika? I cannot.
How have they flown by? My goodness. Wow. So we are trucking forward, and this is a really, really important one, in my opinion. What we're doing, and for our first-time listeners, I wrote a book called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And what I do is I take the most frequently asked questions I get, and I turn each question into its own chapter. And this is the part of the podcast where we go chapter by chapter and just hit a few highlights. And so the chapter today is looking at college admissions recommendations. And the one thing I'll say, Anika, about, there are very few things that I would change in this book that I wrote. But this is one that I would actually change. Recommendations are so important that I would have broken this out into a couple more chapters. And I would have made one. Right. Yeah, I would have made one just for teacher recommendations, one for counselor recommendations, and one for other or outside recommendations, because they're extremely important. But tell me, you've read the chapter. What were some of the things that jumped off the page to you as you read this chapter?
Okay, so my faves, all of it. It was a lot of good content here, by the way. So the first one,
let me say something. Let me say so because I jammed it all in. That's why I put a lot into. I should, put a lot in. It probably should have been 3 little mini chapters, but anyway.
and that's okay, because it's all right there for us. But the first one is one that's so basic that you sometimes just don't really think about. And that is to read the requirements of the school, like the recommendation requirements. Because you assume going into this process that, you have to have teacher recommendations. So you're just all about going in and to your school or your teachers or whoever and asking. But you're not really you're always thinking to look at your schools on your list and see what their letter of recommendation requirements are. Make sure you read them and see if they even want them. Sometimes they don't even want them.
Yeah, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there and elaborate. So it's exactly. So some schools don't want them. And then other schools, schools are very explicit in telling you how many they require and how many they will receive, right? So it's very common that a school might say, we require 1, but we'll receive another one, or require 2, but we'll allow an optional one. So that's what you're talking about, because that can be frustrating when we told you how many we will receive, and then you send us 5 more.
Right. And do you remember that student you talked about? Was it? He said some ridiculous number of recommendations into some schools, 700 or something.
It wasn't that many, but it was a lot. There's a saying in admissions: the thicker the file, the thicker the kid, and that's not a good. Thick is not a compliment,
right? In any form or fashion.
So keep going. What else jumped out at you?
I'm gonna give you 2 more. So the next one for me was, which I was so happy. It said to ask at the end of your junior year and to give them a resume. I was like, oh, ding ding! First of all, we're on track, yay! And for Janaea. And
Mhm.
but you reminded me about the resume because I'm always doing. I'm so hard on Jalen about it, and I've got Janaea started on it, but we haven't revisited it recently. So I was like, oh my gosh, thank you for reminding me of that. So that is helpful and reassuring. Felt good to know that we were still ahead of schedule on that. And the last one, well, not the last one, but my third one I'm gonna share before I let you dive in is that and I know we talked about this before too, but this was so refreshing. We talked about these teachers choosing a teacher that can write good letters. Like that's a thing. Not all teachers write letters well. And
Mhm.
one thing I want to ask you about is you have this mention in here about this guide to writing evaluations for MIT. And you
Yeah, I'm actually going to share that in the recommended resources today too. But
oh,
go ahead.
really? Really?
Yeah.
So that was,
Mhm.
so my question about that is I can imagine someone asking me to write them something. And this is just me, and I'm just being honest, and they give me a
Yeah.
guide like that. I could take offense to that. I'm like, excuse me.
Yeah, no.
Trying to tell me
You
how
got
to
to
write.
be you have to be extremely careful with that. Let me
Yes.
table that and include that in the recommended resource section.
Okay.
But it is very, very important. And so I think it is an important question you could ask is how do you know who writes a good recommendation letter?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
And you say to ask the counselor. And I'm assuming that there's some setup within the school where the counselors know the teacher's writing skills and all that stuff. I don't know how that works internally.
All right. So let me talk about this. This is where there is just tremendous difference between schools that are incredibly college prep oriented and really, really large understaffed schools. And can be a huge advantage of private schools. I mean, I work with private schools, Anika, where the professional college counselor, usually one that has done college admissions, so they understand how this stuff works. They pre-screen every single letter and they will send it back to the teacher if it is not written in a way that is going to positively impact the kid. Now, that is a whole different level. There's no way in the world, and this is just part of the inequities that come when people have resources. They can put themselves in these schools that do these kinds of things. There are other schools I work with that have designated certain people as recommendation writers who are phenomenal writers, and they actually take it out of the hands of the student, which I'm not really crazy about, but they are ensuring that these unbelievable writers who are fully trained are the ones who are going to do the recommendation writing. Now, if you don't have access to all of that, and if you go to your, Anika, guess what the ratio is for school counselors to students in California? Just take a guess.
Probably 1 to 250.
Oh boy, usually your guessing is like on point. You are off this time. No, because
I'm guessing it's way
the
low.
national
right?
average is between 450 and 500. That's the national average. And in California,
wow.
it's closer to 1,000 to 1. Yeah, closer to 1,000. And keep in mind,
gracious.
You're talking about guidance counselors, not college counselors. They're not trained as professional college counselors. In many cases, they haven't even had 1 or 2 designated college counseling courses as part of their master's curriculum. They're doing scheduling changes and logistics and personal counseling and intervention. And obviously, there's some very good ones who have taken it upon themselves to get training, but they're not specialists. So just the sheer numbers alone for the very good ones that are out there are such where they can't really do the same thing if you're at 30 or 40. So here's some other things. Definitely ask. Usually, really good teachers are also good recommendation writers. Good teachers can communicate well verbally, and they can also usually communicate well in writing. For you students who receive teacher comments that are sent home, look at the caliber of the writing very closely. That is another way to discern who is a good writer. So that's just a little tip. Think about who your really good, communicators are. Anything else you want to share on this, Anika? Because there's a lot more that's important that I feel we need to share with our listeners.
No, I just want to. Those are the ones that stood out most to me. So we can stop there.
Let me ask you a question. Do you remember why I said I like to ask at the end of the 11th grade and why I like to have you select 11th grade teachers?
Well, because a couple things. So number one is timing. Everybody wants to cram, wait until the last 2 weeks before the deadline. And you're overwhelming the person with a last minute request. So that's just being respectful, right?
Yep.
Giving them a heads up.
You don't want to be the 47th kid.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the 47th kid that's asked the teacher in the last 2 weeks to write a rec in November or October.
I need it really fast. I need it really fast. I need you to do it on top of these other 500.
Yes.
And then the second thing is that these teachers they've taught you through your courses. Like, so you'll be able to get a recommendation from a teacher that has actually followed you through an entire course that would know you better than someone who hasn't taught you yet in 12th grade. How's that?
Right. So that's the reason why it's better than 12th, right? Because in order to ask a 12th grade teacher, unless the 12th grade teacher had you before or knows you really well outside the class, that's a little different. The 12th grade teacher, the jam you have there is you're either asking them at the last second or you're asking them in September, they don't even know you. Right. But also, why would I say 11th would be better than 9th and even 10th?
Well, along that same vein is that it's been a while since they may have engaged with you. So, that's kind of like outdated information almost, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So from a college perspective, who you are in 9th grade is not who you are in 12th. And recommendations are about partly social proof. But they're also trying to find out what kind of student you're going to be in the classroom. And so you could have significantly changed, right? And the other reason is because it's more advanced coursework. So when the teacher talks about what you're like in the class, the school, particularly if it's more selective school, is getting a better gauge at how you handle more advanced coursework. Because obviously your 11th grade class is going to be more challenging than your 9th grade. So those would be some of the reasons.
But Mark, can I ask you this though? Are some of the requirements listed on the school's website? Do they get that specific and say, "Hey, we need a letter from an 11th grade teacher"? Do they ever get that specific in their guidelines?
Yeah, they really don't get that specific.
Oh, okay.
They may hint. Some schools have really good frequently asked questions sections. I don't think people realize how good some of the FAQ sections are on the admissions portion of the website. So they may say things like somebody more recent is more valuable than 9th. They may do that. I've never seen them say, give us an 11th grade. They because for one, it's not an ironclad rule either. So let's say you had a teacher in 12th, Anika, but let's say you also had that teacher in 10th. Well, that could be a great time to ask a 12th grader, right? Because they kind of had you before. So that's why there are some exceptions to that 11th grade rule. So that's why they probably could not come right out and just be that explicit. Sometimes a 10th grade teacher makes sense, but that's rare. I would only recommend this if the following criteria apply. It is an advanced class, and I would want this teacher to be a far bigger raving fan of you, the student, than any of your 11th grade teachers. And I would also want the teacher to have been in regular communication with you in the 11th grade so they can add a current perspective on how your character is now.
All right. Okay.
Because of that. This is a great question, though.
We would like to thank every listener who has financially supported our show.
We want to make sure that our friends of the show know that you absolutely can make a one-time gift, or you can sign up for one of our monthly giving levels. Recently, we received a lovely letter from a college counselor who made a gift and said she wants to support the show quarterly, and that is also okay.
And if you make a one-time gift or a quarterly gift, you may still be entitled to the same benefits we extend to our monthly donors.
That's right. For a gift of $60 or more within the first 12 months, you'll get all the benefits we provide in our Sustainer plan. And a gift of $120 or more in the first 12 months, and you'll get all the benefits we offer in our Expander plan.
So to support the show, all you have to do is go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. Either click the monthly gift tab or the one-time gift tab.
And be sure to visit our frequently asked question page, which is also located at yourcollegeboundkid.com for more details. This is also where you can learn about the Sustainer plan and the Enhancer plan.
Your financial support helps us defray the sizable expenses that it takes to deliver all of this great content that is aimed to empower you and your family's college admissions journey.
Different people have different abilities to give, but whatever you can contribute will be greatly appreciated and it will allow us to remain commercial free. So thank you in advance.
Thank you.
So some other things to keep in mind that are really important is the teacher needs to like you and know you. Okay. Right. This is incredibly important. It might seem axiomatic, but it's basic. Like, they need to like you and know you. I call it be a raving fan. And do you remember how I said how I actually recommended a student discern whether the teacher will like you or know you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Remember what I said in the chapter?
I remember, was this in a chapter or was this a conversation? I can't remember. But anyway. So
go ahead. Go for it. It's all information. It's all information.
So if I'm the kid, I'm making the request to my teacher, the teacher's like fumbling, like body language. Like they just don't feel comfortable. They clearly don't feel comfortable in having this conversation with you. That's like a number one red flag. That they may not be your best advocate.
and I would even go a step back before that. I would say when you ask the teacher, and so I would ask you a question, I want you to be like gut-wrenchingly honest with me.
Oh, yeah.
And then I want you to say, can you write an enthusiastic letter on my behalf?
Mm-hmm.
And because if you can, I really would honestly rather you just tell me that. And then you also look for body language.
Right.
Okay. So
and one other thing you just reminded me, Mark. I really appreciated the part when you advise the student to ask the teacher for a private conversation. Like, don't just get up from the class, after the bell rings and then you say, "Hey, can I ask you a question real quick? And can you write me a recommendation?" And you're standing there, the class is transitioning. But to actually set that time to have that private conversation, I thought that was really helpful too.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that point up, because think about it. Like, there's people behind, there's other people listening, people coming in. Like, you can just see how you could get a really politically correct kind of answer in that type of situation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm going to share one thing. Anika didn't put this in the book, so this is a value added as an extra.
Ooh.
And I have to be careful to communicate this well, because I'm really big on authenticity, and that's important to me. And so I don't like to do things in college counseling that smack of what we call extreme packaging or just manipulating the system. There's things people do all the time, like they get divorced so that they don't have to pay as much on the FAFSA, and they move their family across the country to Wyoming. And I'm not into that kind of stuff, so that they can be the Wyoming applicant. Like, I don't really try to game the system like that. Or another thing that people do is and some counselors advise this, I don't. They fake that they're interested in a major that they know the school is looking for people in to try to get in, and they have no interest in that major. So I don't do those kind of things. And this is right up on the cusp of that, but I really believe this is the right thing to do. Now, what I'm going to say is something that if you were to probably ask an admission officer if they like this idea, they may not like it. But I will tell you what, if an admission officer flipped what we call flip to the other side of the desk, which is the term when admissions officers go over to, what I'm doing now, placement rather than admissions, they would be telling their people to do this. And this is what. So in that, what I like to do is if somebody agrees to write your recommendation, I like to go actually beyond just handing them the resume. That's okay. But there's a step further. And it's, hey, would it be okay if we kind of grabbed a coffee and kind of talked about this a little bit? And what do you think that I'm going to recommend happens in that meeting when you get together with the recommendation writer, Anika? Besides pay for their coffee. And I'm not going to tell you to go William Singer bribe them. I'm not. I'm not going there. So, okay. Any guesses? So what I recommend you do is say you bring certain aspects of your background to the attention, and say if you'd be, for example, let's give an example. Let's say that you have been really, really active in your school in eating disorders. And I'm just making this up, right? Eating disorders. And you started a club or joined a club or been very active. And you should feel comfortable saying, if you're comfortable talking about the work that I've done on the school in this particular area, I would appreciate that. And it could be a lot of
Okay.
different things like that. Now, why do you think I would say that?
Because they can speak more genuinely to who you are, and they can bring out aspects that you may have highlighted throughout your application. That maybe that could be like a follow up to who you are, how you represented yourself in the application. But can I ask you a question real quick though? Why would people not like that? When you said you don't think people would agree with that tactic?
Some people, it'd be a mixture. The reason why some people may not like it is because let me tell you, first of all, let me tell you why I recommend it, and then it'll answer that question. So this is something to keep in mind. When a school makes a decision on a student, they're not making a decision on the applicant. They're making a decision on the application. They don't know the applicant. They only know the application. Right. So what gets highlighted in the application is what they will infer will be your area where you will have impact on their campus. So when you have an outside recommender, particularly talking about the impact that you have had in an area, or you have a teacher talking about an area, and let's take it in a teacher context too, let's say you have really been involved in lively discussions and stimulated a lot of debate. And you got to be careful with this because you don't want to tell people what to say because it has to be authentically from them. So it has to be worded carefully. But if you were to say, if you're comfortable, okay. I'd love it if you could kind of highlight the role that I've played in stimulating class discussions. That would mean a lot to me.
I get it now.
What it does on the other side is it really reinforces what you're going to bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And I believe one of the things you want to try to do is to sort of create a compelling narrative throughout your whole application. This is most important for highly selective schools, Anika. This is most important for schools where everyone has high test scores, everybody has high grades, everybody has strong curriculum. So the decisions that are made often come down to what will be the perceived extracurricular impact, how strong is the essay, and other intangible and other personal traits and personal qualities that you're bringing to the table. And so when recommendation writers and when outside writers draw attention to your extracurricular impact or just to your overall impact, what it does is it really magnifies that so that on the other end, like me, when I'm reading, every time when I read an admissions file, I always wanted to know, what is this kid bringing to the table, period? What are they bringing to the academic environment, and what are they bringing to the life of the school? And when the recommendation writers draw attention to that, that's very, very powerful because it comes across like, wow, this kid must have really impacted their institution. Because here I've got a history teacher talking about the role that the student had in the play and what that did for the community. Or when they sing solos, at assemblies, it's like a moving experience that elevates the whole culture of the school. If that's coming from a recommendation writer, it tends to really have a lot of power. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
You definitely want to choose from one of the 5 core subjects of math, science, English, history, and foreign language. This is not the time to ask the teacher who taught you in a cooking class for a teacher recommendation. Okay, Anika, we've talked a lot about teacher recommendations, but all of this also applies to the counselor recommendation, if they are willing to write one for you. Meet them in person. Talk to them about what you're hoping to emphasize in your application. In fact, colleges really look to the counselor recommendation more so than the teacher recommendation to put the student in the context of their contributions to the school community. They primarily want the teacher to talk about what you're like as a student, your impact on the classroom, and what your character is like. And so that's why I like to do that. And this is why you have to have a relationship with this person, right? If you come in the first time you do this, they don't even know your name.
Right.
You're sitting there asking them, they're like, who, what? Like, I don't even know you, dude. Like, So, a couple other things that I want to say, Anika, that are really important. If you are applying in a science major, it would kind of be good to have one of your writers be a science writer, right? Like Like if you can line up your recommendation writers with your intended major, that's another powerful way for a school to sort of see what you're like as a student in an area that may be your intended major.
Yeah, that's a golden.
Does that make some sense?
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
By the way, I want to go back to your question. Like, do schools tell you what to do? Some schools will give you more direction. Like, if you look at MIT, they'll tell you they want like a math science rec, and they also want someone like from English or history or foreign language. So they say give us one of each. So they won't necessarily say give me 11th grade, but there are some schools that tell you, look, we'd like one from math and sciences and someone on the humanities side.
Okay.
And that would be an kind of an ideal scenario if you had 2 recommendation writers. But that doesn't trump that they know you and they're enthusiastic about you. Like, I would rather a student do a math and a science recommenders who love you and are enthusiastic about you and can talk about your impact than give me a tepid recommendation in like another discipline just to be balanced. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Anika, when I talk about other recommenders, what do you think I'm talking about?
I automatically think about like outside, your coaches, the kids doing AAU programs, or think about, a pastor in a church because you do so much work in the church, things like that. Those are my immediate thoughts around it.
Well, yeah, those are great ones. There's others as well. And I mean, an employer can be a fantastic one, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
Another one can be somebody who is like a mentor to a club. Like have a faculty advisor to a club. Remember, other is not outside of school necessarily, but it is someone who's a non-teacher. And I do love if you can have an other recommender outside of school that can give a glimpse into what you're like outside of school. I think those can be fantastic, like the AAU coach, like you mentioned, the employer, the pastor, those type of people. Not a family member.
And you mean I can't write Janae's outside recommendation?
You better not. I'll be on my way to Greensboro so fast. I'll get a cop hat on and a cop uniform, and I'll fake that I'll pretend I'm a cop and I'll be arresting you. Okay, can't do that. And do you remember what I said about the senator letter that tried to write?
Yes.
Tell our listeners about that. Put that, what I'm talking about.
Well, that's the one where I guess they had a connection to the senator. He agreed to write a letter, but had no clue who the child was and just thought that his name was going to be the weight to carry over in that child's recommendation letter. Nah.
Yeah. And the blood was like boiling on everybody on our admissions committee when we read that. We were like, "Is it going to play us for some fool? You think we can't see through this letter?" I mean, the letter basically... The letter basically talked about how he knew the dad, and he'd heard that the kid was a good kid. Like, so don't go for some celebrity connection that you think you have. And I get a lot of that, by the way. Like, we know so-and-so, should we have them right? And how well do you know them? How well do they know you? And then there's usually now listen, if they know you like that, by all means. But anyway, I just want to throw in, and once again, Anika, just like the teacher recommendation in the Common App, it will tell you, do we take an outside or other recommender? If so, how many? How many are we open to? And last thing I want to say is, when you go into the Common App and it tells you how many recommendations you're allowed to submit, that is a really good indication how much they value recommendations. So take Davidson College, Anika, where, of course, my daughter graduated. Your son is about to graduate in 1 month. Congratulations.
Thank you.
By the way, I need to give you that Airbnb place that we stayed at for graduation. Remember, you wanted to have your family stay there.
I got one.
Oh, you did?
I got one.
Okay,
and
good.
It's awesome. On the lake. Oh, we'll talk about that later.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that later. Oh, you got one.
Yes,
good for you.
It's awesome.
But Davidson College, do you know that they allow 3 teacher recommendations and 3 other recommenders? That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But that means they are reading everything and considering everything. That means you have up to 6 people that can speak on your behalf. And what that tells you is that they find these to be tremendously valuable. And you remember this about Davidson and Anika. Remember, you have to have your friend write a recommendation for you? You remember that?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Oh, see, because you know
What
why?
letters were, but
Because Jalen was at boarding school. He probably had one of his peers, and you might not even known about it. But yeah, they
yeah,
have a
there you
peer
go.
recommendation letter.
Oh, I do remember that. Thank you for bringing that back to my brain. I forgot about that. I remember him. I remember who he asked to do that. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, because
was interesting.
I was going to tell you last week. You remember everything because when we talk about essays, you're like, you remember everything. I'm like, how do you remember all your kids' essays like this? I don't remember any of that stuff.
Oh, I remember those.
Yeah,
that I do remember.
But that's a little insight for people. Like, take a look at what is both required as well as what is permitted, and know that that is telling you right then and there how much they value these puppies. Because you'll see schools that don't consider them at all and don't send them. So that's a clear message, right? Versus another school that allows you to have 7.
Right.
But I like the out.
Yeah, I remember how strange that was.
Which one? That many, or that you could do the peer?
No, about the peer thing. I was like, wait.
Well, you know what's interesting?
Yeah,
I've talked to multiple Davidson admissions counselors about this. They say you would believe the stuff that we learned from that. Like they swear by that. You know, everybody's do some different things. I don't know if you know, Richmond lets a parent write on behalf of a kid, which was very common in boarding school. I don't know if you remember that. Boarding school parents would write on the behalf of the kid. But yeah, so people do some different creative things out there. But just know recommendations matter.
Yeah. How about the what you wrote from was it Jim Miller? He was a former dean of admission at Brown.
Yeah, why don't you share that?
Yeah, I thought that was awesome. Where he's advising the student to write a thank you note to the person after they've agreed to write the letter, not after they write the letter, but after they agreed to write the letter. Because it's almost what he says, almost like a guilt trip. He felt bad that his student, was so thoughtful and wrote him a thank you letter, and he didn't do it yet. So I thought that was cool advice.
Yeah. So basically, if our listeners didn't follow that, what Jim Miller said, former dean of Brown, is anytime he ever got a thank you letter after he agreed, and he hadn't written the letter yet, he's like, "Oh my goodness!" he's like, "What a massive guilt trip! Like, let me drop everything and write this thing right now." So he said, "One is the right thing to do. It really is the right thing to do because people just ask and then they don't ever think. It's really important just to do it because it's the right thing to do. But there's a little sort of tangential benefit there that it might be the kick in the butt. That it might be the kick in the butt to get people to write. Another thing is, writers, now it's hard to sometimes know this. You want to ask a writer that's responsible, because nothing's worse than the writer that agrees to do it and you're constantly having to send them reminder notices.
We've been through that before.
Yeah. And sometimes people that are not really organized, that actually can be a problem sometimes with them, and so that's another thing to be careful of. I'm very passionate about this, Anika. Janet Repley from Princeton, Dean of Admission, here's what she says. And I agree with this, by the way. This is what she says about recommendations. By far, the most important part of your application is your transcript. Tied with that are your teacher recommendations. And so for me, as someone who read files, now, mind you, it had to be coming from a school where they knew the kid, and it had to be someone who was really honest. But when I knew that this was a school where they know their kids and they're honest with us, the teacher recommendation was second only to the transcript as the most important thing in the file. And that means more than your activities, more than your essays, more than your extracurriculars. Now, if you're like the best football player in Georgia, that's going to be a little different. That's an exception. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right. Our question comes from Daniel in Elkridge, Maryland. And Daniel's email reads, "Hi, Mark and Anika. Love your podcast. I listen on the way home from work." Thank you, Daniel. We love that you listen to the podcast.
Thank you, Daniel.
When considering categorizing schools, for example, putting them in the lottery, 50-50 chance categories, how do you factor in honors colleges within universities? My junior is interested in the University of Maryland College Park with a strong interest in the honors college. Would you categorize Maryland as its own entry? as, for example, maybe the likely school, and then the Maryland's Honors College as a separate school on the list in the 50-50 chance category of getting in? Excellent question, Mark. What say you?
Daniel, I love this question. Thank you. And for those who aren't following what Daniel's referring to, in chapter 13 of my book and episode 13 of Your College-Bound Kid, which if you haven't heard, I really would encourage you to go back and listen. To me, it was one of our more important discussions. It deals with the importance of having a range of schools on your students list. Our regular listeners recall me sharing the story of the phone call I got last year from the girl who was number 2 in her class out of 658 kids, and she got in nowhere because she applied to, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, all those schools. And that's all that she applied to because everybody told her how smart she was. So it's extremely important that you build a range of schools. And just to do a quick recap, super short, I actually group schools into 5 categories. There's that top list, which I sometimes call lottery schools. More recently, I've been calling them unlikely schools because when you tell a kid you really don't want to apply to that, there's chances of you getting it are like winning the lottery. What I've learned is that sometimes they don't hear what you have to say after that anymore, especially if their heart was set on that school. So I'm learning. I never told you this, Anika, but in grad school, the RA called me aside once, right? And he's like, I need you to put more velvet on your bricks, meaning like you need a little more diplomacy. And so that's my new diplomacy term, unlikelies. But lotteries, sometimes I still call them lotteries when I feel I need to kind of jolt somebody into reality. Like a kid this year that I was working with, who was like a 3.3 GPA, 27 ACT, and he was determined to go to Harvard. And I was like, I had to like let him know, like, I've never known any student with your profile unless I knew one elite basketball player with that type of profile. And actually their GPA was higher that got in Harvard. So sometimes I'll still call it lottery. But anyway, lottery, unlikely, that's the top category. And those are schools I'm not recommending. And then the next category I call challenge schools or reach schools. I prefer the term challenge schools. 2 to 4 of them makes a lot of sense. And then you have those schools in the middle, right? Possible schools. Some people call them 50-50 schools, target schools, mid-range schools. There's so many different names for these schools. I call them possibles. 2 to 4 makes sense in there. And then you have your probables or likelies. I'm actually upping that to 3 to 5 based on what I'm seeing this year. Recently, I added a new category called a wildcard school. Now, I have to admit, I borrowed this from the legendary Stephen Antonoff, who I plan on having on this podcast for an interview. Antonoff calls any college with a 15% acceptance rate a wildcard, and I'm totally with him. The only tweak I have is that I'm calling schools with a 19% or lower acceptance rate wildcards. Now, they are wildcards because they're so ridiculously selective that even a 4.0 and a 36 ACT or a 1600 SAT is no guarantee of admission. Did you know that Stanford had almost 30,000 applications with SAT math scores in the 700s or the equivalent on the ACT and 4.0 GPAs? So you really don't know what they may be looking for in any given year. Recently, I had a conversation with an admission officer at Stanford that had come from another very selective school. And she said, Mark, I thought the student body was extraordinary at my previous university, but this is at a whole different level. And then a safety school. So that's kind of the range. And basically what Daniel is saying is, how does that relate to an honors college? Does that change everything? And the answer is it absolutely does. Because when you're building your list, the best way to make sure that your schools are in the right categories, if you don't have somebody sort of guiding you through this, you're trying to do it on your own, is to make sure that your test scores line up with the average test scores that the school has. And so what happens with, and your grade point average as well. And so what happens with honors colleges is that, let's just take University of Maryland, the one that he talked about, right? So the University of Maryland, they do something unique for their honors college. They actually automatically will consider people for their honors college. But who do they consider? They consider the top 5% of their applicants. So what that's going to do is completely shift the game, right? So let's say before, I'm just making up these numbers, but let's say a 600 SAT in math puts you in the medium part of their portfolio, their portfolio, I'm talking like art student of their students, like right in the middle, right? Well, on the honors college, you may need a 750 to be in the middle. So it absolutely shifts everything. So I still believe in going through the rating system where you categorize your schools and you make sure you have a balanced list so that you're not shut out. But everything is going to totally change. And so then that begs the question, well, how do you find out what is a competitive applicant for the honors college so that you know? Any thoughts, Anika?
I would assume that they would have their own guidelines and admissions process as the school itself does, the university itself does. But can I go ahead and tell you that there was a question that you just answered something that I didn't even think about before, and that was if you could apply to both the honors and the regular university. I would maybe assume, or someone might assume, that you can only apply to one of them because it's in the same university. Like you can't have double applications there, but I'm assuming through all of this, that clearly the answer is yes to that.
Well, so that's a great question. So what happens at most honors colleges, although there's a real good mixture, is kind of like scholarships, right? And some scholarships you're automatically considered for and some have a separate application, right? That's how honors colleges are. Some of them you're automatically considered for and some of them there's a separate application.
Okay.
And so if there's a separate application, then you need to apply to the school and apply to the honors college. Now, in the case of the University of Maryland, they do have some stipulations, like no separate application, automatic consideration. But listen, you know how we talked about these priority deadlines, right? They've got a November 1st preferred deadline. Now, preferred is a little different. That means that it doesn't mean if you miss it, you're automatically ruled out, but they are going to give priority to those who meet the preferred deadline. Now, once again, the website is usually your best friend because it will give you more information. So, for example, with Maryland, there's no quota for in-state versus out-of-state, which differs a lot from a lot of states, right? A lot of states you're being paid for by taxpayer dollars, so there's clear stipulations as to how many kids they'll take out of state. Maryland is very open to out of state, and Maryland's process is holistic, completely holistic, much like highly selective private schools and highly selective public schools. So this is not a case where just having test scores, GPA, and class rank and the right curriculum is going to get you in. So that does make it a little bit harder to figure out if you're going to get in, because what that means is things like your essays and your extracurriculars and your recommendations and many, many, many other factors are also being factored in.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking over there, Anika?
A lot. Because I'm honest.
Well, spew it out. Share it with us.
I'm going to be honest. I didn't know much about honors colleges until very recently. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. And I'm just wondering about the advantages of applying to honors colleges. And I'm thinking about Janaea, of course, and her wanting to go to veterinary school. And if it would be, it's competitive. Vet school is competitive. So does she need to be focusing on honors colleges? I don't know. This is all the things that are like literally running through my mind right now.
Yeah. So I'm really actually glad you shared that, because that tells me I haven't emphasized honors colleges enough on this podcast for you just to be coming to that realization. Because in my opinion, particularly for a family that makes, let's say a couple $100,000 or more, not only for this family, but particularly for that family, honors colleges are going to be your best bang for your buck. Because what happens is if you're making $250,000 or more, you're not going to qualify for much, if any, off the need-based analysis. Now, that I have to say that with a lot of caveats, because if you've got multiple kids in school, and there's a lot of different scenarios where you could qualify for money. But most typical, let's say family of 4, 1 kid, family makes $275,000. You're not going to like what you're going to be asked to pay if you apply to the highly selective private schools that have costs of attendance upward of $70,000. But what the honors colleges have done is they've gone to great lengths to try to replicate the same kind of experience that you would get in a private school.
Okay.
Right? So what is a private school offering? What is a private school offering? Well, it's offering you the ability to be surrounded by a selective private school. Your peers are going to be very, very highly accomplished and focused, and you're building an outstanding network of high achievers who will challenge you. And the notion is a rising tide lifts all boats. So the honors college is going to do that, right? Because you're going to be with a collection of kids that are just like that. I mean, if you take the honors college at Maryland, you take the honors college at Georgia, you take the honors college at a lot of places, Anika, that profile of student is no different than a Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford type of kid. I mean, it's very, 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 very similar. It's very similar. It's not that different. So you're around super talented kids with smaller classes, first choice of courses. A lot of times you get to stay all together in an honors dorm. Guess what? Do you think that the school is going to have their worst teachers or their best teachers teaching these kids?
I'm going to go with the best. Yeah.
I mean, think about it. This is a dream to teach those kids, right?
Right.
I mean, so people that have a little bit of clout and have proven themselves, they're going to be the ones that get to teach those. Now, we probably should do a whole separate session on it, Anika, because I don't want to make it sound like it's exactly like being in one of those private schools, because there are some differences, and you do need to take a look. Like, there are schools where they call it honors college, but you're really not taking that many classes in the honors college, and most of the time you're in the general population. Gotcha. But for the most part, it's a huge, huge, huge bang for your buck, because you're getting public in-state prices, but you're getting a lot of the things that make a highly selective private school attractive. Now, what are you thinking? Because I can tell your mind is just racing.
Yes, it is. Oh my goodness. It's about to be May, and then it's going to be July, and then it's going to be September. And it's just like, oh my goodness, we're getting there. And you're going to be proud of me because the anxiety is waning. I'm getting more, it's more of an excitement feeling. It's just like, ooh. Good. Yes, I can wholeheartedly say that. So, but time is a flying.
I really want this practice. I really want this to be fun for people. This should be fun.
Well, I'm not going to say it's fun
Exhilarate.
yet. I'm not. Baby steps, Mark. Baby steps. Not fun yet, but it is more of a, okay. Yeah.
You know what? I love your authenticity, and our listeners do too, because they write us and tell us, like, you just keep it real. There's no pretense. There's no fronting. And that's just, it's all good. I don't change that. All right.
All I can do.
All right. Folks. So fun was an exaggeration. Okay.
All I can do, Mark. That's all I can do.
So I won't expect it to go from like anxiety, stress laden to fun, but
party
at least
time.
it's at excited, not party time, but at least it's moving in direction of maybe it's in the interesting category or somewhere in between.
There you go. It's in the interesting category. Like, woo, okay. You got it. There it is.
You know what, Anika, before we transition, I want to say one more thing about a shout out to particularly the University of Maryland's Honors College, which is really one of the best ones in the country. They do something that I love. They have these 7 living learning communities. So what happens is you select which living learning community you want to live in, and that's who you're living with, and people who have that interest, right? And now this is not something only done by honors colleges, right? Because Karis almost lived on, there's living learning communities. You might want to live on a dorm of people that only speak French. And, this is something a lot of schools offer, but I think that Maryland does a great job. So they've got one called Advanced Cyber Security Experience, and you'll be with people that are extremely interested in that. Another one, Designing Cultures and Creativity. Another one, Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Okay. Another one, Integrated Life Sciences. And then they have others as well. I won't list them all, but that's really cool, because if you like the idea of being around people that have that passion that you have, you can all live together. I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. I love that.
Okay, friends, I think you're going to enjoy this interview. It's with Chris Carleton, who started a website called Study Abroad Smarter, which is everything you'd want to know about study abroad opportunities. Chris talks about various types of living arrangements and homestays when you study abroad in part 1. So listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
I'm here with Chris Carleton this morning. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Chris.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark.
So I have to tell listeners how I met Chris. It's pretty cool. He actually has his own podcast, which we're going to get into later. But he sent me an email asking me if I could be a guest on his podcast. I must have missed it. So he patiently waited a couple months, sent me a follow-up. Hey, did you get my email? I got it. I went on his show, really got a chance to see his heart and his passion. And so I've invited him to come join us today. And we're going to get into our subject matter in a minute. But Chris, I'd love to start by just having you tell a little bit about your upbringing and maybe walk us up all the way to your own college study abroad experience.
Right. No, yeah, I'll go up to when I graduated high school, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good.
So I'm really, I consider myself lucky. I had just like the quintessential red-blooded American childhood, like neighborhood boys biking around, fireworks, sports, just, everything that you think of. Madison, Wisconsin is where I'm from. So 4 seasons. I ended up going to high school at a school called Edgewood in Madison, and then I graduated. Parents are divorced, and yeah, that's pretty much my childhood. I'll get into college, I guess, now. Do you want me to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is on my About Me page, but it actually took me 6 years to finish my undergrad, kind of, because I ended up switching majors in between. And I went to 3 different schools. So after high school, I went to Arizona State for 2 years. And then I came back to Madison. I started a business. And then I did that for 2 years, as well as taking classes at a technical school in Madison. And then I ended up going to University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, where I ended up graduating from and studying abroad through. So that is the background.
So what was your business?
So you have parents listening, I understand, as your audience, and I don't know if any of them have used this service, but it's a service that's prevalent around college campuses throughout the country. The company was called Get Moving Student Storage and Shipping, and there are services on different campuses that what they do is students move around a lot. They come in the fall, they leave in the spring. And then they go home for the summer, they study abroad, they move from dorms to apartments, fraternities, sororities, etc. So they're always moving, but they're still kind of in the same area for 4 or 5, however many years. So what the company did was, let's say spring rolls around, we'd drop off the boxes and they'd pack their belongings. We'd pick them up, store them like in Madison. And then when they'd come back in the fall, we'd drop them off to them so they wouldn't have to haul all their stuff back and forth.
So that is a brilliant concept. And I have to tell you the story. I got this really nice, I guess you'd call it mini refrigerator, but it's one of the bigger ones. Like, it goes up to like your waist.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's such a pain because, you got to like bring this thing home because I let my kids use it in college. And so you got to lug this thing home every year. Or one time we ended up paying like $100 for someone just to keep it over the summer, just for that one little fridge. So I'm sure I would think you did well with that. That was a brilliant idea.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great learning experience. It wasn't sustainable if I wanted to graduate from college.
I hear you.
But I know. I did it with my roommates at the time. We actually we got clients. So just like I've been told, at the time I was told, like, if you do anything and people pay you for it, like in the form of not like selling T-shirts or anything, but like an actual business, you do pretty well and you learn a lot from it. So yeah, I'm really happy that I was able to do that.
So that's fantastic. And I'm being very gracious having Chris come on here because he did go to one of our rival schools. Our longtime listeners know I'm a Michigan State grad, which is Big Ten. and the Wisconsin is the Big Ten. But we kicked your butt earlier this year, so I'm feeling like I'm in a good mood here in basketball right now.
Yeah.
So let's transition to our topic for the day, which is the value of studying abroad. And I'd love for you to talk about your own study abroad experience. I'd love for you to talk about why you studied abroad, where you went, and what the experience was like for you.
Right. So I studied abroad, and I'm a bit different. I did it actually the last semester of my undergrad. So I studied abroad, and then I got home and I graduated. And I studied abroad in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I was there for 6 months. So the last spring semester. Yeah. And but the reason I went, so I finished my undergrad in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, my major was management, and my peers were getting jobs like managing Kohl's department stores, which is it's a clothing store in Wisconsin, like a big clothing store, or that, for example. And the financial crisis happened in 2008. And just to give you context of like historically, like where students were, I remember as a freshman in Arizona talking to seniors as I was like rushing fraternities, and they were saying, this week they're flying me out to Pittsburgh for a job interview. Next week I'm flying here, and they're talking about signing bonus. And graduating college, it's pretty coveted, and then the landscape has completely changed. So I knew I needed something to level the playing field, and studying abroad ended up being it. I'll get into the nuts and bolts of how I studied abroad maybe later in the interview, but I can tell you it wasn't the traditional experience. I knew I needed an oomph or something different, like I said, and I found it through professors at Whitewater.
Nice. So it sounds like you were looking mostly from a competitive marketing edge to make yourself more marketable in the job market as far as the why. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, I was able to learn a little Spanish too. I haven't practiced it as much as I want to. Like on LinkedIn, I'll say limited working proficiency or job application, so I can get by on it. But so many of the people that I interview, and God bless them, it's what they want to do, is the like travel bloggers and people that life is a book, you only read one page, and I get that, and I love to travel too, but I went to purely to be competitive.
But I think it's great because what it shows is that there is more than one motive, legitimate motive behind going abroad. A couple of questions for you, Chris. First of all, how did you even find out, about the study abroad options, at your school? Like, was that from a professor? Or was that from sort of the student chit chat, the buzz, your advisor? I mean, how did you, become apprised of what your options were?
Right. So, like probably most students, I had like friends and peers that had studied abroad, and I wasn't set on going. You listen to some people, oh, I knew I wanted to do it, and some people are like, yeah, I just kind of fell into it. I knew people, and I wasn't really sure about it, and it got to the point, like I said, when I could have graduated actually in the fall semester before, but I just decided to do this, and because I didn't know what I would do when I graduated. So it was the family members. But as far as taking the first step, there's a resources page actually on my site, and I reference it constantly in the podcast and on the blog, and it's to go in and meet with your study abroad advisor.
Nice.
These people on campus, I joke, I know it's part of the tuition, but I can't believe you don't have to pay them for what they do. They do so much. Mine, they help you decide where you want to go, how long you want to go, what fits your budget, everything you need to know they do. Mine even went so far as to help me with my scholarship essays, write them, edit them, critique them. And he set up this whole study abroad thing that I did. And I guess I can get into it now. What I did differently is I did 2 independent study abroad classes, and I was also able to take classes at the university down there. So I had a period of 5 months where I didn't have to go to any physical classes, but I just was able to do 2 big projects. And that's what led to me getting really amazing jobs after I graduated.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 65 is an article on the MIT website entitled How to Write Good Recommendation Letters. I love this article, and we will post the link to our show notes. We have a lot of college counselors and CBO counselors who listen to our podcast, and this will be a stupendous article for you to know what a school like MIT looks for in a recommendation. The article starts out with the following quote: "Because of our highly competitive applicant pool, letters of recommendation hold," check this word out, "substantial weight in admissions decisions." There is a section of this resource entitled, "Try to address the following questions in your evaluation." Now, underneath that, "try to address the following questions in your evaluation," there are 9 bullet points that would help even the most experienced teacher write better rec letters. Then the article looks at 6 sample letters, and it gives a critique of which ones are good, why they are good, as well as which ones are mediocre and why they are subpar. If you are a parent, please share this resource with your college counselor or guidance counselor. Now, you don't want to act like you're telling them how to do their job, but just say you read an amazing article and you want to share it and pass it along. I used to try to tell my students to do the same thing with their teachers, but it was so easy for it to come across very inartfully and for the communication to backfire and offend. So now I try to get this in the hands of counselors, college counselors, guidance counselors, and ask them if they feel it would be helpful to share with the teachers. I implore you to check this out. It is a superlative article. We will now return to my interview with Chris Carleton on the value of studying abroad. Okay, so obviously it worked. It accomplished its goal.
Yes.
How do you know that your study abroad experience correlated with job offers? Like, was it something that? Can you talk to us about that? You know, you started getting more interviews, or people told you, or how do you know that was helpful?
There's nothing there's no statistic or anything, but what I can tell you, especially as a young kid or an undergraduate someone who just graduated coming into the entry level job market, I don't know what I would have talked about in the job interview had I not studied abroad. I put all the focus on it. And again, it's a path less traveled, but I was fresh off the boat back from Buenos Aires going into these jobs. So the experiences, the memories were more vivid, and you just got back. That's so cool. Everyone wants to hear stories of people that traveled. So I just kind of put the two together and it worked.
Nice. So it gave you a real conversation starter, and then you could probably see that it was resonating. Oh, that's interesting, and people had follow-up questions. And generally, you can kind of tell when people are impressed with your background. And I'm sure a lot of it is anecdotal, but if it happened more than once, I'm sure you have a sense of conviction that it was real helpful.
Yes, exactly.
Does that pretty much sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's stories on the podcast too of people finding out in the interview, oh, I studied abroad in Australia too. No way. And if something like that happens, you're automatically going to get moved to the top of the list.
Nice.
So there's so many. Yeah, there's a lot of stories like that too.
Well, I'll tell you, it's exciting to have you here. We've had, around 60 episodes, and we have not had an expert and a specialist in study abroad come on here. The closest we've come to this, we had Nancy Bean, former president of NACAC, 40 years in education, interviewed her on episode 42 and 43, and she just underscored there's 4 things every student needs to do, and one of them was go abroad. But I'm happy to really do this deeper dive with you. So walk us through the jobs you had after graduation, because you've been involved in some other entrepreneurial ventures that I found really interesting. So why don't you talk about, you left Madison, kind of what you did all the way up to what you're sort of doing now, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I graduated and I came back to Madison, and again, it was 2010, and I didn't really know where to go or what to do. So I've always said that there are 3 things that are recession proof, and it's education, entertainment, and crime. And I knew I wasn't going to become a criminal, but
good.
Yeah, I was always interested in entertainment. So I moved to Los Angeles. I didn't know anyone there, but I knew people through like a third degree, but not really. And I ended up just kind of I kept going with the whole mindset and mantra of what I had in Buenos Aires. So I moved there and I stayed in a hostel. So there are hostels in the United States. It's not just like some European thing. There are hostels everywhere. And I was able to, it worked out terrific. Because I was able to meet people who were moving there, to most of them aspiring actors or directors. So I got to meet them. And then there were always people coming in from all around the world. Los Angeles is the most popular study abroad destination as far as cities go of any city. I believe that it varies, but I think it still is because of the entertainment industry. So I was interested in that. And I ended up getting a job as an assistant for a talent management company. And it was just like, I always tell people, if they've ever seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada, it was like that, where I was the assistant running in with the little notepad, and extremely demanding. Again, great experience. It was the hardest I've ever worked when I worked there. The hours were about 8 to 8 every day, and sometimes on Saturdays, and not like sit on the computer and just be there, like intense work. Calling people from interesting people, high profile clients, time zone differences, scheduling. So I got to do that, and I just jumped right into Los Angeles. And then I ended up doing that for a while, and then I fell into digital marketing, which is what I learned in Buenos Aires. That was where my focus was. And I got a job at a startup there, which has since become a digital marketing agency in Los Angeles called Act Bold. And those guys are really great. And I learned so much from my boss there, Ido Cohen. And so I did that and learned a lot, came back to Madison, and because I just wanted to come home. And then I started working for a startup here called Eat Street, which is an online food ordering platform. And so it was kind of a perfect storm, because my job entailed me traveling to a different college campus every week.
Nice.
Yeah. So they'd have different deals there, and I was there to facilitate, make sure everything went well. So here I was, and again, I said the perfect storm. So technology, and I love being on campus. I love college. I joke that I love everything about school but the actual schoolwork and studying for the tests. But so I'm always on campuses, and it's been a goal of mine ever since I started, probably since I was in Buenos Aires, to just start a website from scratch and build and gain a lot of traffic and get an audience and just have something to say. Like, if you do that, it means you're doing something right and it resonates with people. And that's where I am now. Started the website. It was going to start as a blog. I did one podcast by accident and posted it, and it got a lot of views. So I decided to do both. And now, on the website,
let's tell everybody what the name of your website is, and let's kind of go into the website. Chris, what do you have on there, and what's sort of the best way for someone to maximize the value of the website? Because I think there's a lot on your website that our listenership would benefit from.
All right. Yeah, sure. So the website is studyabroadsmarter.com. And within that page, there is the Study Abroadcast, which is the podcast. And then there's the Study Ablog, which is the blog. And
creative.
The resource. Yeah. I told you, wordsmith, right? And
yeah.
The resources page, like if you go to other websites, you'll see lists or everything. Go here, productivity this, productivity that. I love all that, but I just decided to focus on. I just made an infographic of the 7 reasons to go see your study abroad advisor. So that's the resources.
Nice.
And then also, as far as the podcast, on the subscription page, and you have a podcast too, but there are several different mediums that I don't know people are aware of other than iTunes that you can listen to a podcast on. So that's what's on my resources page. And yeah, so I post frequently, and there's contact and everything up there. So there's interviews from people on, I joke, so there's on 6 different continents. So I'm still looking for that student that studied abroad in Antarctica, even though I don't know that I'm going to find them. But Yeah, so interviews with students, advisors, and bloggers and such that are involved with international education.
Next week in the news, 6 terms to stop using in college admissions. And we'll be in chapter 66 of 171 answers. And it's all about what visual and performing arts majors need to know that is unique about their college application process. And next week's question is from another dad. And he wants to know if he will be able to optimize college discounts either through FAFSA or through the institutions, because he is readying up to have 3 kids in college at the same time. And Mark will continue his interview with Chris Carleton, founder of StudyAbroadSmarter.com, in part 2 of the value of studying abroad.
And friends, May 1st is National Candidate Reply Day. And for you seniors who are thinking about signing an agreement, I just want to really, really encourage you to look at the fine print regarding the money. Make sure that you're truly comparing the actual full cost of attendance from one school to the next, because not every school shares accurate and real financial information on those forms. And also be very careful that you do not fall for the trick of thinking that a loan is a grant, because some schools disguise loans as grants. So buyer beware.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Luckenbach. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo, and marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.